Hello and welcome. You're watching News9. We're bringing you stories from the world of business, policy and economy. First up, bank boards are now asked to settle with willful defaulters. The Reserve Bank of India has placed the responsibility of settling such cases with the board of directors directly. And you will soon be able to use interactive voice response system IVRS to transfer money. NPCI is working with AI for Bharat to make voice payments a reality very soon. Also on the show, aircraft lessor Wilmington Trust has moved NCLT to initiate insolvency against Indian low-cost airline SpiceJet. What does this mean for SpiceJet and its future? We'll bring you all that and more. And also on the show, cinema business is hurting as many single-screen theatres are going to shut down very soon. Theatres across UP, Bihar, Orissa and other states in this country. We're bringing you all those stories and more on this bulletin. With me at this point in time in the studio is my colleague Karthik Malhotra. Welcome to have you back, Karthik.
Thank you, Shweta. Good to be back.
the big story that we're tracking, and I think airline aviation space, we're tracking for very, very long time now. SpiceJet, it seems, trouble is now mounting as one of its lessors is moving to NCLT.
Tough to say, Shweta. What is happening is this is the third lessor which is moving NCLT, filing for an insolvency against SpiceJet. Now, two lessors have moved in the last 1 month NCLT, and their cases have been heard, but some have been disqualified and some have been moved to a future hearing. Does it mean SpiceJet is looking at immediate grounding? I would assume not yet.
Okay.
Remember, within the last 1 month itself, through this course of these 3 insolvency pleas, SpiceJet has also used about $50 million worth of its ECLG, Emergency Credit Guarantee Line, which the government offers, as well as some of its own reserves, to keep its flights up in the air. Now, we saw in the case of Go First, for example, it was a voluntary insolvency plea. In this case, it is not voluntary. So the lessors, having learned from what happened with Go First, seem to be getting cold feet and are assuming the worst, that in the event that SpiceJet were to get grounded and use its voluntary insolvency like Go First did, then the aircraft that the lessors have leased out to SpiceJet will continue to be grounded, and the lessors are not going to get any return from those aircrafts. Neither will they get the aircraft back, nor will they get the rental income on the leased aircraft.
On the aircrafts, yes.
So I think that is the constant nudge, that is the constant push that lessors are doing, because they see trouble mounting for SpiceJet. They believe that the airline does not have enough funds to continue flying, to continue servicing its contracts. And I think it is just a plea of desperation that, hey, let's get our leg into the door with NCLT. Let's tell them that, yeah, we feel the airline is going to go down, and get NCLT, put the responsibility pretty much back on the tribunal court to get some control of their aircraft back. Now, 3 aircraft last month got deregistered by DGCA, right? One of them belonged to Wilmington, which is this third lessor which has filed the plea.
Now, before we go to what's happening at SpiceJet, something very interesting you pointed out, and that is it appears that lessors are getting a cold feet. On the back of what has happened with Go First, essentially, where they could not deregister on time, which means they could not repossess their aircrafts, nor could they get the money that they were hoping to get. For the benefit of our viewers, let's quickly go through what happened in case of Go First. Go First moved to NCLT and voluntarily, and then lessors moved to NCLT, but their plea wasn't heard and wasn't entertained.
Absolutely. So Go First knew that there was trouble. It had the faulty Pratt & Whitney engines, because of which 50% of its fleet was grounded, and that sort of exacerbated the financial crunch that the airline faced. So it realized, before it gets too late and more losses get mounted, better to move, quote, declare insolvency. So they did that. As a result of which, even when the lessors moved the appellate tribunal, NCLT, they didn't really get any tailwind, to speak the airline parlance, and were actually met with a headwind saying, NCLT saying that, hey, go back to NCLT. The order has been passed there, and we are not going to overrule that order.
Right.
So if the aircraft are grounded, they are grounded. You can't get them back until the matter sort of evolves and passes through the channels of the IRP.
Which means an entire moratorium period of more than 300 days.
Exactly. So it's a moratorium of 300 days through which the airline should resume operations or should get grounded permanently or somewhere in between, and that will decide the fate of whether the aircraft go back to the lessors or the rents start accruing back to them.
Okay. So
in this case, yeah, go ahead.
Lessors essentially faced with just two choices, either to first to challenge, which they did. The plea wasn't entertained. NCLT told them to go back to NCLT, and we don't know what has happened thereafter. We don't think that their plea is going to be heard because the moratorium period stands, which means they'll just have to wait and watch around for 300 days.
That's right.
Their only hope being that Go First will go back to Skies and they will be able to get some sort of payment in return for that.
Or it goes bankrupt completely, is declared a bankrupt airline, the license is suspended and the permit is rather suspended, and they get their aircraft back. So in either scenario, I think it's a wait and watch game for the lessors, but until then, that 300 days moratorium is a year of business lost, right? So that seems to be the reason why the lessors this time are going against SpiceJet and filing for an involuntary insolvency against SpiceJet, so at least they can get control of their aircraft.
Right. So that they're moving quicker.
That's right.
As opposed to lessors of Go First,
That's right.
who were a little too late perhaps in moving against the airline. Krishna is joining us on the show at this point in time. Krishna, good morning to you. The big story that of course we continue to track here is with respect to SpiceJet and lessors now. Third lessor that is moving against SpiceJet, asking SpiceJet to deregister, asking NCLT in fact to deregister the aircrafts that have been leased to SpiceJet over a course of time. I want to understand from you what exactly is the way ahead for SpiceJet at this point in time. What can we see SpiceJet doing, because it is operational at the moment, may not be able to, and from what I'm reading, may not be able to give back as much money as it had promised to its lessor, but all is not too well with SpiceJet too.
No, definitely. And Shweta, if the voluntary insolvency proceedings, which Go First undertook, went off well, why'd be sitting here saying that why is SpiceJet doing what it's doing? It should have done exactly what Go First did. If it's going to have so much cash flow issues, go for a voluntary insolvency proceedings and then take it from there on. But we're seeing what's happening with Go First's own voluntary, bear in mind, Shweta, that was the voluntary insolvency proceedings that have hit, troubled waters because, or troubled skies, if I may, because we're talking about airlines. The problem is that because, you have a delivery, a vendor who's actually saying that Go First took payments a day before filing for insolvency and other stuff, and the airline industry says more such claims could come towards Go First insolvency proceedings. Whereas SpiceJet, on the other hand, what is happening to SpiceJet is the polar opposite of what was happening with Go First. This is involuntary insolvency proceedings generated by the lessors, the people who lease the aircraft to SpiceJet. So I have a feeling that this is going to be even more complicated than Go First as far as because this is involuntary proceedings and it's gone up to the National Company Law Tribunal. Bear in mind, the NCLT is also adjudicating on whether deliveries claims against Go First Airways are also valid or not, and also how the insolvency proceedings of Go First have to go forward. So at this stage, all I can say is that flyers, passengers like you and me need to be worried, because already one airline that is not flying, and now you're looking at another airline possibly getting into a situation where its aircraft fleet could be grounded, Shweta, and that's certainly not going to do well for the already high airfares that we're witnessing.
Okay. The possibility of the airline being grounded at this point in time is really low. We don't know whether that's going to happen or not, because 3 lessors have so far moved to NCLT, and from what we're looking at, SpiceJet has 67 aircrafts at the moment, of which 37 are in operation, 30 are not in service. Some of them have been given back to the lessors. Even if, and I'm not sure what the figures are, perhaps you can apprise us, Karthik, that even if Wellington's aircrafts are to be given back to them, do you think SpiceJet will still be viable, or do you think their plea could be entertained? I understand that this is all will happen, won't happen kind of a situation now. We don't know anything for certainty.
You're right, Shweta. So I would not put a low or a high probability sort of, expected outcome to the NCLT hearings. Going by past data, in the last 1 month itself, 2 lessors have been turned back. So the aircraft continues to fly. depends on what kind of a case Wilmington builds against SpiceJet and what kind of numbers, projections it takes to NCLT, and that is going to decide the outcome.
Right.
Will an India-based tribunal at this stage, already dealing with a go first situation, already dealing with a Jet Airways not yet taking off situation, proactively ground a third airline? That seems like a little low confidence. I wouldn't say low probability. It seems like low confidence. But at the same time, I think it clearly depends on what case gets built against SpiceJet, and basis that the NCLT takes a call.
Okay, but in all of this, I think it's the customer who's got to lose. Over the last 1 week, we've seen a lot of changes. Civil Aviation Ministry kicking in some sort of preventive measures from airfares to skyrocket, which they did, by the way. And we are now told that the prices are back to normal. And when I say normal, prior to what they were when Go First or before Go First grounded operations.
Yeah.
So the ministry there had to intervene to sort of curb the massive hike in prices. But if at all SpiceJet were to go under, it's the customers, people who are going to take to skies, they've got a lot to lose.
So I would look at it with two angles, Shweta. One, of course, is the price, which you detailed out very well. The second also being the convenience. Now, what happens is, if there are fewer number of airlines flying, and if there are fewer number of aircraft up in the air, you're talking still about a much longer queue outside every check-in counter outside airports, right? Flight timings get compromised. So with more carriers in the air, you have flights every, let's say, 15 minutes to the same destination. Now you're talking about flights maybe every 30 minutes. Same number of passengers vying for the same seat, vying for the same destination, have fewer choices left.
Absolutely.
And that means greater chances of flights being oversold, greater chances of you arriving at the airport and your ticket given away to somebody else because you did not show up, at the prescribed time. And at the same time, you're really talking about, if I need to travel to Bangalore today or Bombay today, would I prefer to book my ticket on SpiceJet today? I would perhaps hesitate looking at this news item because I don't know whether the airline is going to be up tomorrow or not.
Right.
So I will, in any case, opt for the more the airlines that I'm more confident about. So in any case, it is bad news for SpiceJet. But I think overall there's a cost problem and there's a convenience problem that customers will have to deal with.
All right, so it's a two-pronged problem there for customers at this point in time, but also for the overall aspirations, Krishna, of our civil aviation sector. And we understand government here is trying to proactively intervene. We saw Jyotiraditya Scindia, the civil aviation minister, came on record and talked about the void that has been created as a result of Go First grounding its fleet. Also prodding Go First management, the interim management, and the insolvency professional to ensure that there is a plan in place for Go First to come back to skies. But with this news of SpiceJet and what Karthik rightly said, I'm somebody looking at this news item today will be very wary of booking a flight on SpiceJet today, which essentially means there's a lot of jitters around what's happening in the aviation space and turbulence, as you pointed out.
Oh, absolutely. It's and Karthik has hit the nail on the head. The confidence levels will go down when you see something like this happening. And that's the problem as far as India's civil aviation sector is concerned. As you've been talking about, it's already a fledgling domestic airline industry that we have. And it's only going from, the situation is only going from bad to worse. Bear in mind, Jet Airways is down, Go First is down. Now SpiceJet will be the third airline that has the possibility of now going down. And even with these three airlines and the entire fleet up in the skies, we still are not able to meet the kind of demand that we have in this country. And there was need for more and more domestic airlines. There was need for Air India, Indian Express to do well. And now, with that entire fleet being reduced by half, more than 300 aircraft from Indian skies are now grounded. More than half of its original fleet, of Indian Airlines' original fleet, is now grounded. And that is a terrible situation to be in as for flyers. Right now, it's been bad for the last month or two already in terms of ticket prices, especially with the Balasore tragedy exacerbating the situation further on certain routes on the eastern end of the country. So at this stage, SpiceJet needs to be saved for the sake of you and me, Shweta, so that the flight ticket rates, domestic flight ticket rates, which are already looking like flights to Bangkok and Dubai, it will start looking like flights to Europe and America. If any more aircraft is grounded, Shweta.
Okay, not to add to the existing jitters, SpiceJet is still safe. You can still book a flight on SpiceJet. Remember, this is the third lessor. We don't know if NCLT will entertain the plea or not, so you can still actively book on SpiceJet if you are hoping to travel anytime soon. But shifting focus to another important story that we're tracking, and that is with respect to non-performing assets and willful defaulters. We're now given to understand that RBI has directed banks and bank boards to proactively settle willful default. Essentially, Karthik, asking banks, asking them to take responsibility of every time they're lending to someone and that person is either unable to pay back because they don't have the funds or they willfully default. So banks are now supposed to be more responsible as opposed to what it was earlier, which is you pass on your NPAs back to RBI, RBI has to deal with it. So banks there have to now prop up and ensure that they are taking proactive measures to only lend to people who are credible, if I were to say that.
I read it slightly differently, Shweta. While, of course, what you're saying is part of the requirement, I think in addition to that, what I read into this news item is that RBI is now asking bank boards to lay out very, very clear policies on how they will deal with deemed willful defaulters.
Okay.
So, up until now, the understanding was that, hey, there is an NPA, a non-performing asset. What is a non-performing asset? Let's break it down. I've gone to a bank, I've taken a huge loan for my business, let's say. I say business because usually the volume of that loan is larger, but it could also be in the case of personal loans. But let's say I take a business loan, a fairly large quantum of business loan, and I receive it and I deploy it somewhere. Now, if it's a 20-year, 30-year loan, 5 years later, I realize I don't have the wherewithal to pay it off. Now, up until now, what used to happen was that after a lot of nudging, a lot of coaxing, a lot of coercive action that banks would take, eventually it would reach a position of stalemate, where the bank would go to court or I would go to court or the bank would take me, drag me to court and say, hey, here is this guy and he has defaulted on a large loan. Court, please tell me what needs to be done, right? And then it would become the court's headache looking at the contracts, looking at, what kind of mortgages I had made. And we've seen enough of these cases, and headlining cases from Vijay Mallya to Nirav Modi to whoever not, right? So, so what really happened back then was that this would stay in a condition of stalemate. It would still reflect on the assets component of the bank's balance sheet because this was unrealized return of loan, and it would continue to be on the bank's books for a very long time. Now the RBI has told bank boards to proactively draft out very clear, very stringent policies on how they will deal with a situation like this at the bank board level, not necessarily at the level of RBI or the court, and understand whether the bank decides to go in for a compromise settlement, in which case, I took, let's say, 500 crores, I'm able to pay 100 crores back. Would the bank rather realize that 100 crore rupees and forego the 400 crores or not even take this 100 crores and keep fighting in the court, right? And the second component, one being compromise settlements, the second being a technical write-off, where I decide, hey, okay, I've had enough, I'll possibly end up spending more time, effort, money dealing with continuous hearings of court, so let me just write it off and move on with life, right? So I think a very clear mandated policy framework to be worked out at the board level of individual banks is what RBI is mandating.
Okay. Something that stood out for me, as I was pointing out right before the show, is that for the very first time, RBI is hinting at compromise norms. Essentially, prior to this, RBI would, or the central bank would ask banks to take the lender or the borrower, for that matter, to court. Ask the lender to take the borrower to court to settle it out, to ensure they're either punished or you get the money back. In most cases, even in case of Vijay Mallya was ready to pay back, but the idea here was to punish him for the fact that he did not pay back, did not meet the obligations. But for the very first time, we're looking at compromising here, which I think augurs well for the banks too.
I think, again, it'll depend on a case-to-case basis. It'll clearly depend on the quantum of loan, on the quantum of compromise. But yeah, the fact that compromise is on the table now means that there would be headway instead of a stalemate.
Okay.
So that, depending, again, it's going to be a case-on-case situation, but bank boards will have to take responsibility now, given the policy framework that they write down and communicate to the lenders, that if the lender was to default, and if the lender being, let's say, a willful defaulter, where the bank feels that the lender has the wherewithal to pay, but is playing truant and doesn't want to pay, and hence becomes a willful borrower, becomes a willful defaulter, then what are the avenues available for the bank to deal with that situation?
Okay.
And laying that down as a clear-cut policy framework is what this new move is.
Much needed there.
Much needed,
much
for sure.
needed. Krishna, it's not just an economic story, it's also a political story. And I want to take you back to 2014, before which there was this huge conversation debate around NPAs. I mean, every layperson who did not really could define NPA was
Knew
talking
what it was.
was talking about NPAs. They knew that this is a problem. Essentially, a group of people who have the capacity to pay back were not paying back. This was the common understanding in a non-economic parlance. A group of people powerful enough to get heavy loans from banks and mortgage very little back to the bank, were able to get huge sums of loan, were not able to pay back, would flee off the country, and then you would have the Interpol, the police, and the entire media. It was a circus of sorts. But for the very first time now, we're looking at some sort of norms to be put in place for banks to settle with willful defaulters. I think it really augurs well.
Right, and since you gave the snapshot of history of NPA in this country, which which broke into common parlance headlines in 2014. Yes, absolutely. And the question that was often asked was, we take a 1 lakh rupee loan, we can't give it back. They send people over to our house. How come multiple crores, lakhs of crores worth of loans and nothing is happening? So finally something has happened, Shweta. And in this case, I view this as one very simple thing, that the onus is now being put fully on the banks when it comes to NPAs, because it's like, the government and the RBI telling the banks, saying that don't let your NPAs grow to a size where it's completely unmanageable. And then the onus is on us, the government, the authorities and the RBI, to make sure no banks fail, because you can't let banks fail because of any reason, leave alone NPAs. You can't allow banks to fail in this country or in fact anywhere else in the world. In fact, so that kind of a mentality is what sets in once the NPAs go to a point where it's unmanageable. The bank can't do anything, nobody can do anything, then it gets taken over, moratorium is issued, blah, 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 blah. But right now, what's happening, I view this as that. Let's not get to that stage. Let's nip things right in the bud. And the onus is being put on banks and bank managements to make sure they have checks and balances, clear-cut, defined, concise policies with regards to NPAs or non-performing assets or loans that they are giving out to people. How, on what basis are you going to give out loans? How are you going to review it? When does it become an NPA, and when does it get completely taken off your books as an NPA as well? All of these things will have to be part of the policy that banks have to make. So in that sense, we've seen the fact that the PNB scam or most of the bank scams, it's the bank authorities, the bank officials, the bank individuals who are, who are circumventing rules, who are doing things to ensure a fraud happens eventually. So at the end of the day, and then, they ask questions about from the government, from the state government, central government, RBI, authorities, blah, 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 blah. Right now, the way this is given, clear settlements, write-offs, NPAs, the bank creates a policy and sticks to it. If the bank doesn't stick to it, it's a corporate governance issue. So it's the bank's fault squarely. So this is all about appropriating responsibility and final blame as well, Shweta.
Okay. NPA still continues to be a major problem. From what I'm looking at, Karthik, loans worth 10 lakh crore have been written off in the last 5 years. Essentially, this is all NPA. This is what the bank has decided. We're not going to get it back, so might as well write it off our books. Right. And I want to understand at this point in time, what is leading to these either increased or stagnancy in NPAs? Do you think we've been able to curb the problem?
No, in fact, NPAs have only come down from my
So we've been
reading.
able to curb the problem.
We've been able to curb the problem to a great extent. And this is the whole sort of, banking regulation and the whole revival of the banking sector, which the RBI has done very hawkishly over the last 5-6 years, maybe more. And this whole rejuvenation of the banking sector and the success story that India's banking sector has compared to its peers across the world rests on this sole instrument where we have been able to tackle with this menace of cleaning up of bank books and dealing with NPAs fairly efficiently. So I think this latest move by the RBI further strengthens that. And this time the RBI is coming out and saying very clearly that a willful default on the books of a particular bank is the bank's headache. It is not the court's headache, it is not the RBI's headache, and I think also sort of nudging banks to believe that they may not have a big brother to fall back on, and if they are dealing with a NPA-like situation, it is going to reflect on their books and their books alone, and perhaps giving a signal that taxpayers may not continue to be responsible to add the green bucks back to your books.
Right. So just two quick things that I want to ask or clarify at this moment. Writing off bad loan does not mean NPAs are coming down, does it? I mean, essentially, NPAs could just be there. We continue to write them off and they could still be growing. So are we suggesting at this point in time that NPAs have also come down?
So technically, if you do more write-offs, more writing off of your NPAs. Now, what are NPAs? If you look at how books of finance are written.
How does it become an NPA? For the viewers who want to understand how does a loan become an NPA?
Happens? Where does this particular component of a loan that you have issued as a bank figure out on your books of accounts? It's a balance sheet and a cash flow issue. It's not a P&L issue, right? Now what happens is you give 1 crore rupees worth of loan to somebody, right? There's a cash out of 1 crore rupees. That cash goes from your cash flow statement, right? But this 1 CR and some interest is going to come back to you at some point. So it becomes an asset for you in your balance sheet, right? It's an asset which you can claim back. So it'll continue to be an asset for you. But the interest that you get on that goes back to the profit and loss statement.
Right.
That is income from assets, interest from assets. That goes into your profit and loss statement. Now, when you write off an NPA, what happens is the value of your asset goes down. The 1 crore gets wiped off from your asset. But this 1 CR now becomes a problem for you because this becomes a P&L issue. Right.
So it's a loss.
Overall, it becomes a loss for the bank. So if bank losses were mounting and NPAs were coming down, it would have been a little more obvious that you're writing off NPAs and hence, you're just writing them off for the sake of glorifying your books. But since banks' profitabilities, especially PSUs, are also rising and NPAs are reducing, I think overall the situation is a little better.
It's getting better. And for the sake of people, what is the difference between a willful defaulter and simply a defaulter? Let's say I were to be taking a loan of 1 crore. If I were not to be able to pay it back, I would not be deemed as a willful defaulter if I still have assets that I can mortgage to pay back that loan. So essentially, willful default is partly also a bank's problem, not thoroughly going through the mortgage, perhaps tinkering with what my ability to pay back. What do I have to pay back in return? Do I have enough property? Do I have enough sort of, physical property to whatever assets do I have, whether they can be liquidated to pay back for the loan that I have given or not. So essentially, all in all, it's looking good right now as far as policy framework for bad loans is concerned, because remember, as Karthik pointed out beautifully there, it's not just the losses that are mounting and NPAs that are going down, it's also the PSUs specifically are making more money and NPAs are also reducing. From here on, it will be banks' responsibility to come up with a framework in order to write off or compromise with a non-performing asset. So we'll have to wait and watch out for more details.
There's one little glitch there, Shweta, that I think we must point out. The glitch being that it has become, over the last 5-6 years, in this drive to clean up books, in this drive to reduce NPAs, it has become increasingly difficult for small and medium enterprises to take bank loans. And I think that difficulty will only rise further.
Okay.
So that becomes one glitch, and hence there are more expensive loans that small and medium enterprises are taking from outside of the banking sector and paying a much higher yield on that loan, a much higher interest on that loan to keep businesses flourishing. So, you know, it cuts both ways. While it is good for the overall banking story, while it is great for taxpayers overall that their money is not going to be used to clean up bank books, but for small medium enterprises, it becomes even more difficult now to attain these bank loans, because the policies that will be written are going to be written in a way that, you know, you don't want to be caught napping in a situation where somebody has defaulted on a large loan.
Very stringent measures there for small medium enterprises. That does not augur well, because it's not very easy to get money that they require for their operations. We'll come back to that story, but another important story that we're tracking at this point in time, and that is you would soon be able to use a voice response system to transfer money. This is going to be interesting because NPCI is now working with AI for Bharat, which is essentially our homegrown AI that we are incorporating into our systems in order to make it easy for people to now make digital transaction. I think this is an important story because, you know, the way it's been written in the newspapers when I was reading the papers this morning is that for you to be able to talk to somebody, any retailer too, let me give you that quick example, you have to press 20 buttons in order to either exchange, return, or whatever you want to do with that product if you are interacting with the retailer. But in this case, what NPCI is now doing is, it is hoping that you will be able to use your voice as a customer to transfer money from one person to another, from a lender, from perhaps a retailer to a person to person to person. So anyway, B2B, B2C, all of that could be made easy.
Or more complex.
Okay, okay, yes, absolutely.
So I feel, you know, UPI is fairly simple. Scan, enter the amount, enter a PIN. The PIN doesn't really have a language because you have keypads in any case which can be customized to a language of your preference. You could have 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 0 written in the Hindi text, written in a Chinese text, written in any other local Kannada, Bangla text that you prefer, right? So, but as long as you're entering that information, only you are privy to that information and your transaction goes through. In this case, the AI will have to learn so many accents. The AI will have to ensure that whatever you intended to say has been understood, you meant it, has been understood, and the reconfirmation that the AI would eventually seek has come out in the affirmative, and hence the payment goes through.
Right.
So I don't know. I think, you know, why fix it if it ain't broke? The system is working well. It is language agnostic already, right? Will this add a layer of convenience or will it add a layer of confusion? I don't know. I would wait to explore it, test it out, and then stick my neck out and vote in either scenario.
Okay, let's quickly get in Krishna for this story. Krishna, interesting, because what we're looking at is you can now be or will be able to use in future, not right now, but NPCI, they're working very actively with AI for Bharat to ensure that you'll be able to speak in your local language, and the system will be able to detect that language, and you'll be able to transfer money from one person to another. And B2B, B2C, as I mentioned, we don't know the details of it quite yet, as yet, but Karthik rightly pointed out, it could either make it very easy or make it very complicated. There are multiple layers to this story, you know, how to do it and how convenient it will be. More importantly, will AI be able to rightly gauge what you're trying to say?
Well, I begin with agreeing with Karthik on that one adage: if it ain't broken, don't fix it. I'm also somebody who completely believes in that. But here is the problem. Shweta, you know, are you imagining a time? I'm guessing we're all imagining a time when we're going to say something like, "Hey UPI, transfer 100 rupees to Karthik."
Okay.
You know, that's what we're looking at eventually. Or, you know, UPI ji, kripiya karke 100 rupees Karthik Malhotra ko ke paas pahuncha dijiye. One of those.
I love your Hindi.
Example in Tamil than in Hindi. Want to give that a shot for our viewers?
UPI 100 rupai Karthik Malhotra ke amchi utringa. So that's sort of like, you know, that's also colloquial Tamil, by the way. The sentence I spoke is colloquial Tamil. So AI needs to be able to understand everything from colloquial street Tamil to pure Tamil. Same like, you know, Gali ki Punjabi to Thet Punjabi. You know, that's what AI needs to be ready with. But we are all discussing this the week after Sam Altman came to India. Sam Altman came, met the Prime Minister, and also made a few disparaging remarks saying that Indian startups can never match up with the kind of growth in artificial intelligence, in the technology that startups in Silicon Valley has. So, I am at this stage, as Karthik said, I'd like to wait and watch. Yes, the PIN code, scan, all of that has already made things so simple. And Shweta, we've been talking about how trillions of transactions take place on the UPI every month already. In the month of May already, the number of transactions are in trillions. So, things are going rather well, extremely well as far as the UPI is concerned. Indians, I have adopted UPI, digital transaction, digital payments far greater than their compatriots in the West. And it's incredible that in India, when there's not enough banks to reach people, you have the UPI allowing people to, transact with money. So it's fantastic. What will happen with the use of AI? Probably this is the case for the future. And probably it's India readying itself for the artificial intelligence future that's evolving as we speak. So I wouldn't want to completely rule it out at this stage. Yeah, maybe not tomorrow that we're going to have in Tamil, Punjabi, in all these languages. We're going to be talk to our UPI app, whichever UPI app that we're going to use. But I would definitely say that I cannot guess what's going to happen 5 years from now. Nobody 5 years before would have thought we would be using scan codes today. And look at the amount of scan codes we're using today. Maybe it's time for, hey Siri, paisa pauncha dijiye.
Okay. I think we're going to all wait and watch out for that. But of course, it's going to be a humongous task, Karthik, as the technology that would be required to gauge accents, the way you speak, the fluency, etc., and then make sure it's your voice and not your brother's, sister's, or spouse's voice to take the money out of your wallet and out of your system. So, of course, a humongous task there for AI. But positive news coming in by the way of some development using AI to transfer money from one person to another. There's a long course that we'll have to, a long path that we'll have to walk to be able to make a system, develop a system that's going to be foolproof. But up until then, we're going to keep tracking all those developments for you right here on News9. Thanks very much for watching.